Good morning, I'm Joe Fryer. Savannah is off on this Friday morning. We begin this hour with yet another plane incident that is putting flying passengers on edge. This one happened in Colorado. Here are the images of an American Airlines plane just moments after its engine caught fire on the tarmac. The flames were sparked after the plane made an emergency landing at Denver International Airport. Nearly 180 people were on board the flight, dozens of them forced to evacuate over the plane's wing. NBC News correspondent Steve Patterson is on the ground in Denver with more on what led to this scary scene.
Yeah, Joe, good morning to you. The latest, we're hearing from the Denver Fire Department that 12 out of those 178 people on board taken to a local hospital treated for minor injuries. This was a flight that was coming from Colorado Springs bound for Dallas-Fort Worth. But about 20 minutes after takeoff, the FAA says that the crew started reporting these rumbling vibrations on board the plane coming from the engine. And so it was diverted after only about an hour in the sky, taken here to Denver International Airport. One of the engines, we're told, caught fire on the tarmac, and that's when you see those horrific sights on the ground, the thick black smoke billowing out of the engine of the plane, people fanning on the wing of the plane, the ground crews deploying ladders, deploying those slides. Thankfully, everybody able to safely make it off the plane. And as you heard, only about 12 people taken to the hospital for those minor injuries. Meanwhile, the FAA is investigating. American Airlines saying that the protocols here were all followed. That allowed the plane to safely land. And of course, safety is the top priority. We know, of course, there will be an investigation, and this is just one of many of these air incidents that we've seen over the past few months. But in this case, I think a lot of people here breathing a sigh of relief. Send it back to you.
All right, Steve, thank you so much. We are just hours away from the deadline to avoid a potential government shutdown, but a major concession from a leading Democrat likely means Republicans will get their way. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer now says he will support to move forward the House Republican passed bill to avert a shutdown ahead of tonight's deadline. A key Senate vote on the GOP funding bill is planned for this afternoon, and Republicans do need some Democrats to vote for it. Well, Senator Schumer doesn't like the Republican bill. He says the chaos of a government shutdown would be a worse option.
While the CR bill is very bad, the potential for a shutdown has consequences for America that are much, much worse. There is nobody in the world, nobody, who wants to shut the government down more than Donald Trump and more than Elon Musk. We should not give it to them.
NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Julie Sirkin joins us now with the very latest. Julie, good morning. So this is an about face for the Senate Minority Leader. Just 24 hours ago, we were discussing how he said fellow Democrats would not allow the GOP bill to pass. So first, with Schumer now voting yes, how likely is it this bill is going to clear the 60-vote threshold? Walk us through what we can expect today.
Well, he said last night that he, as leader, has to make the difficult decisions that would then allow those in his party who maybe publicly were saying that they would vote to shut it down, but privately were very concerned, and they were, to come forward and to vote, at least for that first procedural step, to get on that bill and effectively avoid a government shutdown. Leader Schumer was also asked about this by our own Chris Hayes last night, because this really was a stunning reversal after just 24 hours before. He said that they would not be voting for this bill. The Republicans don't have the votes, to then suddenly saying that he would avoid a government shutdown. This is what he said. Watch.
Under a shutdown, it is the executive branch, in this case Trump, Musk, Doge, and Vogt, who's head of the OMB, who we all know are authoritarians, vicious, nasty, who would have sole control over what is funded and what isn't. They get to determine what is a, quote, essential service. I knew I'd get criticized, but I felt obligated for the country, for my Democratic caucus, to the people.
You know, aside from progressives, there were really no Democrats who were saying any of these options are good. They were stuck between a bad option and an even worse option. It just depends for that Democrat which one was worse in the moment. But certainly at the end of the day, Leader Schumer deciding it's not worth picking the fight and shutting the government down.
Yeah, and Schumer said right there he knew he would get criticized. This is creating a lot of drama within the Democratic Party, right? I mean, talk about some of the political pressure that Schumer's facing.
Oh, he's facing a ton of pressure. I mean, the way that he played this strategy from the beginning was confusing to folks because I asked him on Tuesday, 2 hours before the House voted and ultimately passed this interim funding bill. What is your strategy? That is already after Senate Democrats began to engage in their first debate. I'm told Schumer there just for the first time expressed confusion over his strategy or not certain over which way he would go. Democrats then became frustrated. Look, they're split on this decision. They are not united on this at all because Democrats historically have not been the party of shutting the government down. However, the Democratic base has been so energized and so excited by the fact that their elected representatives in the Senate would fight back in this moment, really their only opportunity to do so since the election. The problem is they're just not united in their strategy. A government shutdown, as Leader Schumer said, would be devastating. It is never a winning issue, not when Republicans did it, and not if Democrats tried to force it now, especially given that Democrats have historically been the party of avoiding government shutdowns. And really, this continuing resolution to keep the government open, maintain status quo spending levels, doesn't really do the kind of things or the kind of cuts that Doge, Musk, and Trump are eyeing. That's going to come down the line. And of course, in a situation where Democrats don't have the votes and don't have the power to stop it.
Yeah, this bigger picture discussion certainly far from over. Still, though, Julie, if this spending plan passes, let's talk about what's in it. Will Americans see any significant changes?
Well, it maintains status quo spending levels. In a couple of hours from now, we will kind of get through that first procedural vote. It takes 60. That is why Leader Schumer committed to voting for it. It probably unlocks those 7 or 8 other votes because they are definitely there. It would have put them in a worse position if Schumer decided not to vote for it because then they wouldn't have any cover. In terms of this bill, it maintains Biden-era spending levels, as you saw on your screen. It adds a couple of billion to defense, takes away a couple billion from non-defense programs. Democrats are frustrated about that. It also doesn't have any guardrails to make sure that the administration has to spend the funds in this bill as Congress appropriated them. That's what Democrats took issue with. The thing is, Republicans control the House, the Senate, and the White House. They have very little leverage, and they've tried to pick a fight on a situation where it's not clear what they would get out of it, even if the government shut down. And a very important point, Joe, if the government shuts down, they have to reopen it. And the number 2 Republican, John Barrasso, told me yesterday it would be on Democrats to figure out what concessions to make to reopen the government because Trump, Musk, and Doge don't really care if it's shut down. In fact, it would be the best scenario for them if they could blame and point the finger on Democrats for doing so, but really get their way in trying to dismantle and revive the federal government in determining who is essential, who is not. That would make it a lot easier for them to do so.
All right. Julie Zirkin. Julie, thank you so much. A pair of federal judges is ordering the Trump administration to reinstate thousands of workers who were fired last month. One of those judges is in California. During a heated hearing there yesterday, that judge said the Department of Government Efficiency's directive telling half a dozen agencies to fire all probationary employees was illegal. He also said the Trump administration lied when it claimed workers were fired because of their performance, calling it a, quote, sham. Firing back, the White House called the ruling, quote, absurd and unconstitutional. But hours later, another federal judge, this one in Maryland, issued a similar reversal. He found the government failed to comply with protocol for mass layoffs, giving states 60 days notice. For more, let's bring in NBC News legal analyst Danny Ceballos. Danny, quite a few questions after this one. First of all, though, just what happens now? Thousands of workers who thought they lost their job now get to go back to work? Is that how this will play out?
Yeah, interesting to see how this will actually play out in practice. But the courts have ordered essentially 2 different kinds of injunctions. Really, one is a longer kind, an injunction until the litigation is resolved. And then the other is what we call a TRO, a temporary restraining order. These are usually very short, a matter of 2 weeks. And then the issue can be revisited. But either way, the idea is preserving the status quo, preserving the situation it was before the case was filed. So I should add, in addition, in the Northern District of California, that judge is very interested in getting some high-level members of the administration in for depositions. The government, the administration, is resisting this, arguing that other administrations have always sought to protect their high-level employees or appointees from depositions and discovery. But this judge, at least from the bench, appeared pretty serious about getting these individuals in and getting discovery out of them.
Yeah, and when you hear words like sham and gimmick, it seems like both judges had some strong language here. Were they both essentially on the same page in their different decisions? I mean, what were their reasonings for making these decisions?
Yes and no. I mean, consider this, for example, the Maryland case, the plaintiffs aren't really even the workers themselves. This is an interesting theory. It's the states that are saying, hey, look, there are these federal laws that apply to mass layoffs, and they're designed to protect the states. We, the states, have to take care of these people after they lose their jobs, they lose their income. They are going to apply for benefits, and for that reason, you have to give us states notice, and you didn't do that. And then, of course, one of the other theories is more straightforward. It's basically that you can't say that you're terminating thousands of employees based on poor performance when you've articulated 0.0 poor performance reasons. That is why you hear these strong words like sham, because if you're issuing mass layoffs, they're mass layoffs. You can't just call them firings because of poor performance if there's zero paperwork on the actual poor performance. So the cases are different, but the relief sought, really the end goal, is very similar. And we see that with the outcomes of these these TROs and injunctions.
Danny, we know the Trump administration already planning to appeal the ruling in California. What's their best argument in fighting this?
I mean, straightforward, it would just be that as the administration, they're empowered to do that. They're empowered to have reductions in force, and that they did it properly. And it's the executive's prerogative how it handles its own agencies. That's probably their strongest argument. That will be the gist of it. And that even if they may have violated some notice requirements, the end goal is, and be back to the drawing board, they'll just make sure they comply with the notice and still go through with the reduction in force. That is probably the biggest threat to these federal employees or former federal employees who find themselves in a lot of doubt about their future.
Yeah, a lot of limbo right now for them. All right, Danny Ceballos, thank you so much. It was another bad day for the markets on Thursday. Investors fear the president could be opening up a new front in the ongoing trade war. This time, the president is threatening a major response against the European Union after it announced retaliatory measures against America's steel and aluminum tariffs. NBC senior White House correspondent Gabe Gutierrez has the latest.
President Trump showing no signs of backing off his new tariff threat.
We've been ripped off for years, and we're not going to be ripped off anymore. No, I'm not going to bend at all.
The president calling the European Union hostile and abusive as he threatens 200% tariffs on European alcohol coming into the U.S. if Europe does not drop their new 50% levy on American whiskey.
We sell no cars to Europe. I mean, virtually no cars. And they sell millions of cars to us. It's like a one-way street with them. The European Union is very, very nasty.
All after the president Wednesday slapped 25% tariffs on imported steel and aluminum.
The president was totally annoyed that the Europeans did this, and so you're going to hear back from someone who emotionally cares about America.
Publicly, the administration projecting confidence, touting lower inflation, and both egg and gas prices coming down. But privately, NBC News has learned the stock market slide has Republicans concerned. Two people familiar with the discussion say officials at the White House's National Economic Council have indicated fears it could be difficult to rebound quickly from a downturn. Though in South Carolina, steel producer David Zalesny says Trump's tariffs are critical to saving American jobs.
You've seen a tremendous amount of fabricated structural steel coming across the border from Canada and really decimating and wiping out a lot of the domestic industry.
President Trump mocking Canada again.
Canada only works as a state. It doesn't. We don't need anything they have. Keeping "Oh Canada," the national anthem. I love it. I think it's great. Keep it. But it'll be for the state, one of our greatest states.
That did not go over well here in Canada,
Rubio, is it appropriate
where Secretary of State Marco Rubio took no questions from reporters at a G7 meeting. Social media erupting with calls to buy Canadian and boycott USA.
This is my last bag of American product.
The outrage rippling across Hamilton, Canada, home to major steel companies.
Total insanity. I don't know what Trump is doing, but hopefully there's some plan behind his madness.
Americans need to feel pain. We can't just roll over and experience all the pain ourselves.
And our thanks to Gabe Gutierrez for that report. For more on all this, let's bring in Investopedia's editor-in-chief, Caleb Silver. Caleb, good to have you with us. So now we heard it there, the president threatening 200% tariffs on European goods like wine and champagne. I need to stock up this weekend. What kind of impact would something like that, 200% have?
Yeah, well, there goes Beaujolais, but we're talking about $20 bottles of wine now being $60 bottles of wine. And it doesn't sound like a big deal to those that don't drink, but think about the wine wholesalers, the importers, the small businesses, the liquor shops. They're not going to be able to sell these because we're not going to buy them as consumers. We're going to go for a cheaper version. So there's the supply chain disruption, and then this general feeling that these tariffs are just going to make everything more expensive and more uncertain, which causes a pullback in business spending and consumer spending, and there goes economic growth.
Let's talk about the stock market. Another red day yesterday. Talk about what we're seeing this week. Is this a trend that could continue, or are we hitting a bottom here, or is it just hard to say?
It's hard to say. We are officially in a correction. That's a 10% decline from recent highs for the S&P 500. Now, it's a lot, and it has that wealth effect where people feel all of a sudden like, what happened to all the gains I was sitting on for the past couple of years? To put it in perspective, these happen around every once a year or so. We haven't had one in a long time, but it's the tariff uncertainty. It's the fears of an economic slowdown that are causing investors to pull way back. They don't want anything to do with risk right now, and it's also causing this slowdown in consumer and business spending, and that's got everybody thinking about the possibility, real possibility of a recession.
In the past, the president always seemed to be deeply worried about the stock market. Now his administration is saying we're looking at the long-term effects here. Is our economy equipped to handle a trade war that goes on and on and on, and the price increases that would come with it?
Yeah, it's going to hurt growth, and growth is where what makes the economy go, what makes investors enthusiastic about investing. We're in better shape now than we were in 2007, 2008, in terms of households, in terms of our budgets, in terms of businesses. At the same time, the uncertainty could last a very long time. This could go on for an uncertain amount of time, which means less investing by businesses, less spending by consumers, and a lot less confidence in the stock market. So this could go on for quite a while. The president says it's a slight disruption. Tell that to the folks that are running small businesses or big businesses, or the folks that are depending on their investments to retire.
All right, Caleb Silver, good to have you with us. Thank you so much. The White House is asking the Supreme Court to weigh in on its controversial plan to end automatic birthright citizenship. Yesterday, the administration asked the High Court to limit court orders from district judges in 3 states. Those judges are currently blocking President Trump's executive order from taking effect nationwide. The Justice Department argues the rulings are too broad and should only pertain to people and groups that actually sued over the birthright order. The DOJ is also asking permission for government agencies to begin working on policies around the executive order. 5 out of 9 justices would have to vote in favor for that emergency request to be granted. Legal experts have told NBC News that Mr. Trump's birthright proposal is unlikely to ever be put into practice because of protections guaranteed under the 14th Amendment. And some chaotic moments at Trump Tower in Manhattan. Police arrested 100 people for storming the building. Protesters took over the lobby yesterday, demanding the release of a Columbia University activist. He is facing deportation for leading pro-Palestinian protests on campus. NBC's Laura Jarrett reports.
Protesters flooding the lobby inside Trump Tower in Manhattan, outraged over the government's continued detention of Mahmoud Halil. The demonstration led by the group Jewish Voice for Peace, demanding the release of the 30-year-old grad student who became one of the faces of the protests against Israel at Columbia University last spring and now faces possible deportation. Police placing demonstrators in zip ties, escorting them up the iconic golden escalator after they staged a sit-in for more than an hour, ultimately arresting 98 people, leading them away in a police van and city bus.
Those arrested are for trespassing, obstructing government administration, and resisting arrest.
The outcry in New York and beyond, a response to immigration agents arresting Halil, a permanent U.S. resident, on Saturday, before then flying him to Louisiana, where he remains in a detention facility. The Trump administration invoking a rarely used provision of immigration law in order to deport him, deeming him a threat to U.S. interests for supporting Hamas, which his lawyers deny, saying he's been charged with no crime and they've seen no evidence against him.
I think he's angry. I think he's confused and scared.
His deportation on hold for now as the Trump administration continues the fight in court.
Thank you, Laura Jarrett, for that report. This morning, people in Southern California are cleaning up after powerful storms swept through the area yesterday. Storms produced at least one tornado that touched down in Los Angeles County. The EF0 twister uprooted trees and toppled power lines for several blocks in Pico Rivera. In Orange County, crews had to rescue a man who was clinging to a tree after his SUV ended up in a fast-moving creek. He was airlifted to safety and was not seriously injured. Speaking of storms, more severe weather expected today, this time stretching across the lower Ohio Valley into the Mississippi Valley. Sounds like I know the map stuff there. Meteorologist Angie Lasseman has the latest on that. Angie, good morning.
Joe gets an A+ in geography today. Yes, Joe, good morning to you. We made it to Friday, but boy, we have got a couple of busy kind of weather days ahead of us across the middle of the country and points east. We've seen quite an active pattern for the west, and that same storm system that left us with some of that damage, specifically for Southern California, it is on the move through the day today, and we're looking at a multi-day severe weather outbreak. So here's the lay of the land. We've got that severe weather threat ramping up specifically late into the afternoon hours, into the evening hours, and into the overnight hours, and stretching into your weekend as well. That means we will look for the threat of nighttime tornadoes and strong nighttime tornadoes at that. That, of course, increases that risk of danger from tornadoes. We hate to see that. And then as we get into Saturday, we've got that threat shifting to the east as the front works farther to the east. And eventually, this is all going to work its way closer to the coast as well. So multiple days throughout the weekend when folks have a whole lot of outdoor plans. Here are the threats that we're currently looking at. Right now, we've got a whole lot of people under these wind alerts, 74 million people, and we've got high wind watches, high wind warnings, and wind advisories, and essentially from the northern plains to the southern plains, out to parts of the Ohio Valley. This means that we're going to look for those wind gusts up to 70 miles per hour in some spots. Look at Lubbock. We're expecting this here through the weekend. 71 miles per hour, even parts of Kansas looking at mid to upper 50s. We've got St. Louis, high 40s. This means we'll likely see some widespread power outages and some damage, trees down, limbs down, etc. But we're also going to probably see some flight delays and cancellations. So if you're traveling across especially the middle of the country today or even into tomorrow, make note. And on top of that, we see this elevating that risk for fire starting and spreading because we've got such strong winds and the air is, of course, quite dry behind that system. And on top of it, our vegetation is dry. We need some of the rain across this region. So we could be looking at a wildfire outbreak. Specifically, notice what we're seeing in the red. That's Kansas City, including Oklahoma City, Lubbock, San Angelo. These are locations that we will watch for, again, fire to start and spread quickly through the day today. As we look ahead to the afternoon hours, specifically and into tonight, we'll see the potential for kind of severe weather stretched across basically the Ohio Valley down to the Gulf Coast. It looks like St. Louis right in the bullseye of that. But even if you're watching from Des Moines or Kansas City or Memphis, Jackson, all of these locations, Indianapolis, Chicago, have the potential to see some of these strong tornadoes developing. EF2 to EF5 is what we're looking at. You can see Peoria, St. Louis, Memphis, all included in that. And on top of that, wind gusts could be potentially up to 90 miles per hour with that baseball-sized hail. So this will be something we watch into the evening hours tonight. And again, overnight, make sure you have a way to get those alerts. Tomorrow, not letting our guard down because that system shifts farther to east. Now we've got 52 million people in that severe weather threat risk area for your Saturday plans. Again, the strong long track tornadoes are possible, EF2 plus, and those damaging winds. Not quite as large for the golf ball size hail, but Joe, we finally get a little bit of a break by Sunday, but still we're looking at a slight risk for the East Coast. So just a really busy couple of days, and folks need a way to get those alerts.
No kidding. And tonight, though, in Florida, things look okay, right?
Yes,
all right.
Indeed.
That is some good news because that brings us to our next story. The countdown is on in Florida. NASA's SpaceX Crew 10 set to launch later this evening. The 4-member crew was originally scheduled to head to the International Space Station on Wednesday. That launch was scrubbed because of an issue with the hydraulics on the pad. Now they're set to try again around 7 o'clock tonight. Of course, if that happens, astronauts Butch, Wilmore, and Suni Williams, who have been living on the ISS for several months longer than planned, will finally return to Earth. That would likely happen sometime next week.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.